This is the prologue to Revelation in the Courthouse Park that was performed at the University of Illinois last year. It's a lazy afternoon in a small town American courthouse park.
Just right or wrong. No, no, no. Ha! Don't tell me. I am. Like I am.
And thus the beginning of what might be described as a musical extravaganza by our guest, whose voice you heard a moment ago, Harry Partch of the music department of the University of Illinois.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry to correct you so soon. I'm in the Department of Speech and Theater.
The Department of Speech and Theater?
Yes.
I think the slip of mine in your correction, Mr. Partch, is significant. I know it will be as we go along with the conversation here, more excerpts from your works. It's speech and drama, you say?
Speech and theater.
Speech
yes.
and theater. How would you describe, Mr. Partch has been written about in national publications and musical publications. I don't want to use the word controversial, certainly a fascinating figure in the field of music, an inventor of his own instruments. What is it you seek in music, in expressing what you have to say in music, Harry Partch?
I have always sought an integration of the various elements that go into a true corporeal, shall I say, corporeal dramatic production. And in the ancient sense, and in the Oriental sense particularly, I'm against, I hate to start talking about what I'm against so soon, but it's somewhat easier to get an idea across if you say what you're against immediately. I'm against the separation and the specialization in the arts, so that we have only a music for the concert hall, we have only a theater of dialogue. Now, I believe that we can find a fuller affirmation of theater, of meaningfulness in theater, by bringing all these arts violently into it, aggressively into it. That is, music in an integrated way, and I don't believe that opera is that kind of thing. Opera is tends to be pure music. The Broadway musical tends to be a kind of a play, usually a trivial play with numbers. Well, that is not my idea of an integration of music and theater.
The Water, which is described as an extravaganza, Water is one of your works that will be performed Saturday night and Saturday matinee at the Studebaker Theater.
This Saturday, yes.
Is Water an example of what you have in mind?
Oh, yes, everything I do. Yes,
Yeah.
Excuse me. I have done, this is the 5th big show I've done, an evening's performance, and all of them are of that, of that general pattern, although they vary tremendously in their well, for example, the first one I did was almost a straight version of Sophocles' Oedipus the King. The second one was a satirical dance satire, which I called Plectrum Percussion Dances. The third was another dance satire, The Bewitched, in which there were no words at all. In the one before that, I used nonsense, a good deal of nonsense. This was part of the satire.
In Water, I know the cast generally are larger than that.
Yes, there are around 70 people.
70 students and members of the faculty?
That's right.
And here, a moment ago, you were speaking of many art forms being fused into what you do. I know that tumblers are involved and trampoline
Yes,
art
that's
too,
right.
in Water.
Well, actually, I've always been extremely interested in gymnastics, and of course in ancient times, gymnasts were very much a part of theatrical productions. And I was so interested that I took a microphone down into the gymnasium at Illinois and got their beats as they were tumbling, and just ran along with the microphone. And then I went back and composed the music on the basis of these rhythms.
Now, the instruments that you use, we come to this point now. Before we talk about Water, and hear more excerpts from your prior work, a part of which we heard, Revelations in the Courthouse Park. You use traditional instruments.
I use
brass,
whatever I
piccolo.
think I can fill my needs at the moment. I do make great demands usually on traditional instruments, not so much this time because this is a quasi-popular work, shall I say. And but in all my previous work, the violins, cellos, clarinets had to adhere to a 43-tone scale, and I did this by means of a color notational analogy.
The instruments that you invented, though, you're known too for the invention of new instruments.
I have 17 of my own instruments. Some of them are very large. I have about 6 large percussion instruments and 4 or 5 large string instruments. And by large, I mean 6, 7 feet high or long. And then I have a number of smaller instruments, too.
Well, these 6, 7 feet instruments cannot fit in the pit.
No, that's right. This was a diabolical scheme of mine. I want the instruments to appear on stage. I want them to take part in the action. I want them to be visually a part of the set, a sculptural part of the set, let's say. And in this work, in the new work particularly, they are taking a very important part in the story as it works out.
Now, this is the point you were making at the very beginning of many art forms being involved. The actual seeing of it being played and worked on, too, is as much part of your production, I get it, as the sound.
Actually, it helps the musicians also. They know they're not being ignored. They know they're on stage and they have an obligation as actors. And suddenly I find my musicians getting very fired up over something of this sort, whereas if they were in the pit, they would go backstage at every break and play craps or shoot craps or play cards.
Harry Partch, your instruments have rather interesting names that are classic in sound. Castor and Pollux, the Eroica, one called Spoils of War. These are actual names of the instruments?
Yes, that's right. Well, I've always been interested in the ancient Greek culture and the Greek tragedies and Greek musical theories. And the names come about because these are elaborations in some cases of ancient Greek instruments. The kithara is an elaboration. Castor and Pollux is what I call a harmonic canon. That is, a single string on 2 fixed bridges with a movable bridge between, and the canon comes from that. The canon, the law, the harmonic law comes from the moving of this bridge by proportions of the string length. And this ties in with my interest in tragedy. As I say, I've been extremely interested both in the Greek and in the Oriental attitudes toward theater, and they have influenced me tremendously.
And the theater that you favor is one that involves almost a musical circus, would you call it?
I don't object to the term at all, and both last year's show in part and this one could be called a musical circus.
In that there's the dance, there's gymnastics, there's playing, there's singing, there's drama,
and there's a story
talking,
which
and
ties
there's a
it
story.
together.
All these, as you were saying, in the tradition of ancient theater, really.
Yes, I think it is.
Would you mind, is it possible, I know we're simply audio now and not visual, could you describe one of the instruments of your invention?
Well, I think the kithara is an impressive instrument. In this work that we're doing this Saturday, it stands by the side of a cliff, and it seems to have a cliff-like appearance. It's about 7.5 feet high. It has 72 strings, tapered down from a narrow top to a wide bottom, and it's played with picks on the ends of the fingers, and it has Pyrex rods for stopping higher tones.
I think it was Don Hanahan, the music critic of Daily News, who spoke of your approach to instruments as though you want them to simulate closely the natural sounds, the drawls and slides of human speech.
Oh, yes, that's absolutely true. I've been trying to get that. I love it in the brass when they do it well, and they do it well frequently in jazz. And I'm trying to get that same quality with something else in strings. Now, of course, you can do it in the Hawaiian guitar, but that has become let me put it this way, it has become the symptom of a rather inferior music.
Yeah.
And I am trying to get away from that.
But in jazz, say, the muted horn
Yes,
might have the effect, the growl of the moan.
Oh, yes. I'm for all kinds of sounds, and I'm for all kinds of vocal sounds, too. And the trained singer avoids many of the sounds that I think are most emotional in the human voice.
Before we hear how Harry Partch came to be what he is, the creative figure that he is, the original figure, certainly, and your own background, and Water, Water, suppose we hear more examples. At the beginning, we heard the opening of an earlier work, Revelations in the Courthouse Park. You spoke of a lazy afternoon.
This was my most recent work before the present one, and it is, I should say that it is a somewhat of a psychological parallel to the Bacchae of Euripides, in which the mother is forced into a situation where she destroys her son. Now, this parallel involves a Hollywood character, a fictitious character, of course, who is called Dion. In the original play, the god Dionysus appears. Now, this is Dion, and the first part of this work concerns itself with the welcome of Dion to this small county seat. And part of the welcome is what you will hear now.
It's called Save My Soul and...
Save my soul and bless my heart.
Well, it has a hymnal implication.
Well, it's supposed to have a rather wildly religious quality.
Inside, way, way down.
I am.
Below.
I am.
Below.
I am.
Below.
That was a clog dance, and what is coming up now is a little song number, and then we go into a soft shoe dance.
Way down I am. Deep inside, way, way down I am. I am. Deep inside, way, way down, way up and way down. So high, so high, so low, so low. So high, so low. Don't break my heart, but bless my soul. Break my heart, but bless my soul. Well, bless my soul.
Aha! You're teasing. Oh, you're teasing.
Blow, blow, and bless their heart.
I am.
Blow, blow. Deep inside, way, way down I am. Deep inside, way, way down I am. I am. Deep inside, way, way down, way, way up, and way, way down. So low, so low, so high, so low. Just save my soul and bless my heart. Save my soul and bless my heart. Blessings
Well, Harry Partch, even though your work, this one, this prior work, Revelation, The Courthouse Park, deals with a tragic theme. There's an ebullience throughout in all your work, it seems.
That's a characteristic of the two scenes in the Courthouse Park where Diane is being either welcomed or celebrated. And there's another section here in which it gets even more extravagant.
Before we come to the section involving brass bands and takeoffs on rock and roll, you use classic themes then, but it has a contemporary flavor. Or
yes, well, I'm very attracted to the ancient Greek mythology and to the tragic dramas because there's so much basic in it, and I can't work with trivial material, and so unless it's done sarcastically or satirically.
When we come to Harry Partch himself now, you're not obviously not a traditional composer or maker of instruments. Have you had an academic musical background?
Oh, almost none, I would say. I was brought up on the Arizona and New Mexico deserts, and I was always interested in instruments. My mother and father and brother ordered instruments from mail-order catalogs, but they were either too busy or they tired of them to continue, and I was the one who took them seriously, and so I played a mandolin and a harmonica, of course, and a reed organ and a few things like that when I was very young, and I continued in music. I never stopped.
But self-trained?
Almost entirely, yes. Well, later on, I did have piano lessons and some violin lessons, but I think I entered University of Southern California School of Music for about a month, and about a month with the Kansas City Conservatory, but I wasn't built for academic inculcation.
Well, what led, perhaps you can't answer it, what led to your feelings, your philosophy of music?
Innately, perhaps I don't even know, as you say. But I was always interested in dramatic music. The very first music I ever wrote was a poem or a story poem, which I set to music when I was 14. And my direction has never changed since then, although I was inclined to despise what I had done earlier when I knew more. And then eventually I came back to what I had done earlier because it was the instinctive thing. And I've always been, coming from the West Coast, partly, I was always interested in Oriental music. My mother and father were in China for 10 years, and I was born right after they returned, so there were Oriental books. In fact, half the library was Oriental, and Oriental art objects all around me. And I heard Chinese songs, which my mother sang quite frequently. And eventually, then when we got out of that part of the Southwest, in San Francisco, I went to the Mandarin Theater very often. This is a kind of Cantonese music hall type of thing. It's not classic drama at all, but it didn't seem strange to me. And it does seem strange to most Americans the first time.
So then there was a factor here. You did go to see Chinese theater.
Oh, yes, when I was fairly
all
young.
forms are used.
Yes,
They, too, they have the
right.
tumblers and the jugglers.
Oh, exactly.
You're applying, then, an Oriental theater technique, the Chinese theater technique.
And ancient also.
An ancient
European,
An ancient European to the American scene.
That's right.
Mid-20th century.
That's right.
You work with your hands a great deal. I mean, are you a carpenter, too?
Well, I grew up, my father had a hobby of wood shop, and he built things, and so I grew into that, too. And when I began experimenting, it seemed very natural for me to build a resonator or whatever I needed.
We may come back now to another sequence from the Revelation on the Courthouse
Maybe
Park.
I'd better explain this just a little
Please.
bit. This is the welcome of Diane, the Hollywood king of Ishbu Kubu, to the Courthouse Park, and a brass band introduces him, and then he goes into a routine that, there is a tinge perhaps of rock and roll in it, or a parody perhaps, or something of a parody, and then it goes into a tumbling sequence. This is plain mat tumbling. The tumblers come in fast sequence, or should. And then eventually, when the tumbling sequence ends, behind the people, when this is staged properly, it's tremendously effective. The trampoline is brought on behind the people on stage, and so it isn't even seen until on a huge beat from the marimba, Eroica, the man is seen leaping into the air, and then this sequence is the result of my work in The Gymnast. He is right with the beat. Heavenly days in a million years.
So use, aside from musicians, players of instruments, singers, actors, gymnasts as well, from the University of Illinois.
Oh, yes, and they have a fine gymnast team.
So this opens then with a brass band.
That's right. Yeah. Was a pseudo rock and roll. Now we're going into a calypso rhythm on the same word theme, Ishbukugu. This goes into a fast waltz, and it precedes the tumbling sequence. Actually, there's dancing all the way through this of various types. This is the beginning of the tumbling sequence, and it comes in various phases. At any extravagant feat of gymnastics, the audience on stage, which is the audience for the tumblers, applauds.
Round up, flip, flop, tumble, tumble, round up, flip, flop, tumble, tumble, on.
Now coming up is the trampoline section, with the first tremendous beat of the marimba heroica. The trampolinist is seen behind the people on stage, rising, and his rhythm is exactly that of the music.
It occurs to me in listening to this, Harry Partch, you're using the various performers in the different art forms. This may have come out of necessity too. The fact that you are on the faculty, University of Illinois, you're using a great many of the students too. Did a lot of this come out of necessity, or just?
I wouldn't say necessity. I would say a desire, both on my part, to use the talent that is there, and a desire on their part to participate. And the gymnasts were absolutely delighted that they were being considered for some dramatic roles, even though they don't speak at all.
I think it's interesting that you're on the faculty of the University of Illinois. Of course, you are, as some might consider you, a way-out composer, or an offbeat. And yet, there's the, are you free?
Oh, yes, I'm free. I think that this kind of a designation is true with some individuals, but in any university there are always individuals who would not use those terms to describe me, I'm sure.
Back to these works. This one, I want Water, Water, which we haven't heard because it's not on tape as yet.
No, it isn't.
which will be performed at the Studebaker Theatre, 2:30 Saturday matinee and 8:30 in the evening, with a cast of 70, 80. And does that have as many forms as what we're hearing now?
It doesn't have the gymnasts, I'm sorry to say. I wanted to use them, but they were out on some competitive meet, and so I couldn't engage them this time. It does have one gymnast, a young man. But it does have a jazz band, which is unusual. That is involved with a story. I'll be glad to go into that now if you'd like to.
Let's hear we'll hear more of
all right,
more
sure.
of the music of the Revelation of Cortes going on. Let's hear this part of the story of Water, Water. You described that as, I noticed I have the program here, when it was printed at the University of Illinois, Illini Union Student Activities, Water, Water, and Intermission by Harry Partch.
Well, this is based on the rather cynical assumption, perhaps, that an audience is always greatly relieved, or almost always, depending upon the anguish of the piece that they've just witnessed, is rather relieved to find that an intermission is coming up. It's a farce, as I've described. And so preceding this intermission are 11 prologues, and following it are 9 epilogues. The intermission is called Water, Water because people are presumably going to the drinking fountains. Okay, the prologues and the epilogues also concern water. The place is a fictitious city in the southwest, Santa Mistiana, where droughts are very common, and water is always a very precious commodity. And through the 11 prologues, there's the drought. Finally, through the agency of a baseball game, rain is announced. The game is called on account of rain. And rain does come, and then there's general jubilation with umbrellas on stage, and the jazz band proceeds to blast away. And I'll get back to that theme. But after the intermission, 3 days later, the rain is there, but it hasn't stopped, and so highways are out, bridges are washed out, and there is a general disaster. Well, that's the theme of the thing. Now, the jazz band gets into it because Her Honor, the mayor of Santa Mistiana.
Lady Mayor.
Yes, a lady mayor. She plays a very important part, and it's played very well by Cynthia Schwartz. The mayor takes it upon herself to hire a well-known rainmaker who is actually the god of rain in this thing, and he is also the leader of a jazz band. And he makes rain with jazz, which is part of the general hilarity.
Who's Wanda the Water Witch?
Now, Wanda the Water Witch is a chick that he picked up on the way to Santa Mistiana. And there are a couple of songs about her. And she has a whole gang of witches with her, and they come on stage with their forked sticks and do a witching dance.
So the rainmaker brings so much of it there's a flood.
That's the general
How does it
idea.
end?
It ends in a general acceptance of the fact that there is a deluge. Before I get to that, I should say that there is a courtroom scene in which Arthur was engaged, you see, to bring rain at
Arthur the rainmaker.
That's right. $10,000 per inch, but they would only pay him 1 inch worth. And he got very angry about this and said, well, you don't know how to propitiate the gods, and brought too much rain. And now, I'm sorry, I've lost this point. We were talking about the time after the epilogue, the end, that's right. There's a courtroom scene, and Her Honor has threatened to sue him for $1 million. But first of all, they're throwing the book at him in the way of felonious charges. And this is brought to an end because floods have gotten into the power plant. And so in the darkness, Wanda the Water Witch and all the jazzmen and Arthur escape in the darkness, and since they have no lights. Well, I should go back and explain. Really, the star of the show is Phoebus, the disc jockey. Phoebus knows all, sees all.
Phoebus the disc jockey.
Yes, Phoebus Apollo, the disc jockey. The one who has oracular judgments but takes part in nothing. And he comments. He's the MC. He comments on everything, rather cynically, on everything that is happening throughout.
It's pretty close to the truth.
Well, finally, everyone reconciles himself to the deluge, and in the last act, in the 7th epilogue to be exact, the siren begins to sound, and the final vision is Phoebus the disc jockey descending from high above the stage down into nothingness, and the siren moaning to a descent.
Water, water. Has this been performed elsewhere aside from
No, the very first performance was the 9th of March in Urbana.
And then it will be here.
Yes.
Do you plan to travel with us?
Well, I have no plans. I would love to see some momentum established, of course.
This is the first time, I believe, one of your major works is seen in Chicago, isn't it?
I think so. Oh, yes, it is, definitely.
We may return now, again, to more examples of your music, since the tape that we have is that of an earlier one, The Revelation of the Courthouse Park. We had the soft shoe dance, the trampoline artist, the tumblers, the brass band, the rock and roll takeoff, calypso, The theme, by the way, yet even though there is a humor through all this, your themes are generally tragic in nature.
Yes, I think so. Even Water, Water has a tragic implication, but it may not hit people until a week later.
But this one, Revelation to Courthouse Park, deals with a...
It's after the Bacchae of Euripides, in which the mother destroys her son, or she is forced into a position where she destroys her son.
We come to the scene then.
And then in the what I call the fourth chorus in the Courthouse Park, she has a prophetic vision. It's really a dream in which she sees her son being destroyed, not realizing that she is the agent for destruction. And this little segment is at the climax of that scene. And incidentally, I should say this is sung by Frida Pierce, who did a tremendous job.
And in the briefest moment, they are away, 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 away. And I imagine that they are here when beneath the I have seen them taken before 100 years beyond my power to control.
So the boy in her dream cries out, I am, huh?
Which comes back to the original religious theme that was done in exaltation. I am, and finally this is a desperate cry for life. I am.
And also the old lady destroying his individuality too, perhaps.
Yes, that's right. And then maybe we ought to finish this work, or it's up to you, but since we're on the subject, the end comes when she brings in the mask. In my case, I use the mask to represent his head. She comes on stage with the mask of her son and meets her father, and her father forces her to realize what she has done. And this is the way the play ends. I could say that we're starting right just before the recognition, and his first words are, whose head do you hold in your arms? And when she finally realizes, she says, no, no, and on the very first crash of sound, she drops the mask to the floor.
And the brass band comes up again.
That's right.
This is the end, then.
Then,
the play.
yes.
Whose head, whose do you hold in your arms? Look at it. What do you see?
I see.
Tell me what you see.
No.
thus this extravaganza comes to its end. And thus, too, Harry Partch, in his latest work, Water, Water, will have his work performed at the Studebaker Theater in Chicago and see it for the first time. What has audience reaction been down at the university to your works?
Oh, it's been very good. It has caused caused a good deal of discussion. What does I am mean? What does deep inside, way, way down mean? I'm really not being. I'm not. I don't mean to do this in any sense of ridicule. But there has been a lot of discussion about.
And discussion too, I suppose, of your technique itself.
I think that's been pretty much accepted. That it's going to be unusual.
Your instruments, are there many of your own of the original instruments used in Water, Water, which we'll see?
I'm using eight. Eight of them.
Uh-huh. 8 of them.
I'm not using as many in this work as in the previous one because I wanted more stage room, and they do take a lot of stage.
There's a point that Don Hanahan made that's rather interesting, is in past ages, Harry Partch might have been a church composer. Religious music dramas, such as the play of Daniel, come as near his ideal as Western history discloses. In the secular age, possibly the 4th of July pageant or the opening of a new supermarket.
Oh, I could agree with that. A church composer in the medieval sense, I don't think in the modern sense.
Yeah. In the medieval sense, in that everybody in the town was involved. It was done in a square.
That's right.
It
or
was
or travel down the street.
It had a circus quality of its own, too.
Yes.
The idea of this being like a 4th of July pageant opening of a supermarket seems appropriate in a very affirmative way. That what you do, you use every form. So it's a festival in a sense.
I tend to include, not to exclude.
What next? What are the new projects which you're thinking to?
My only thought now is a rest.
Is a rest. A Water, Water, then. An intermission by Harry Partch, with a cast of roughly about 70 musicians, actors, singers, dancers.
80 if you include technicians.
80 at the Studebaker Theater, Saturday. That's tomorrow, Saturday, at 2:30.
Oh, I beg
no,
your
at
pardon.
2:30. It's Friday morning, at 2:30 in the afternoon, and at 8:30 at night.
That's right.
Harry Partch, original. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a great pleasure to be here.